I'm gonna start recording.
Bring shoes or what? What is this?
I just came from the call.
Hello and welcome to this Writing Center workshop. I'm Michelle Roki-Gannon. I run the Writing Center next door over at 90 Weeks Library. Anytime you have a writing assignment you need help with, we can help you. We're located, when you come in that front entrance, you just take a right, and we're right next to the elevator. The blue-gray sheet that's on the tables has our contact information, our hours. We're about to kick into the schedule beginning September 17th. There's information on the sheet for distance students. And distance students, you can go to the Writing Center webpage for additional information at www.usd.edu/writing-center. There are also answers to commonly asked questions about the Writing Center on the front side, and information on the back of this sheet on how to schedule an appointment online. The gold sheet has our list of workshops, so you can see what else is coming up. Some of you may be interested in writing personal statements for grad and professional school applications next week if you're thinking about that. That's at 4 o'clock. And then there are other workshops in a variety of writing-related topics. Writing an effective summary, power of synthesis, and on the backside, MLA documentation if you want to get some more style in, integrating sources, avoiding plagiarism, and so on. So be sure to take a look through that list and think about coming to some of those workshops. And remember, the Writing Center can help you if you're struggling with APA style. Our consultants are used to working with APA style, so feel free to come in and get answers to your questions. Toward the end of this workshop, we will distribute comment cards that you'll fill out, and if you want an instructor notified, you can put your instructor's name on the card, and we'll notify them that you attended this workshop. You can also put your ID number on it, and you can get PAW points. I assume all of you know what PAW points are, so take advantage of that. Okay, please pay good attention here. Take notes, and Ken Green, who has graciously volunteered to lead this workshop, is going to take over.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So I'm going to talk about some stuff here that's not very interesting. I'm going to talk about not interesting stuff for about 40 minutes. So just stay with me. I'm just being honest with you, like the APA formatting, what is really sexy about that? Not a whole lot. But it's important, right? Because like if you don't understand it, you don't understand how to get these site sources properly, then you can fail the class, right? So this is not interesting, but it's very important, so we'll put it that way. So my students will be talking about this a lot this semester, so if you brought somebody to take some notes, it might be a good idea. You can save yourself a chance to take notes later when we discuss these things. So APA covers a couple different things, and I want to talk about a couple different things here today. First, APA talks about just how a paper or a report, depending upon what it's called in the class that you're taking, is formatted, so what it looks like from the beginning to the very end. It talks about how you cite sources in a text, in a report, so you're generally required to use good source materials, talk about how to cite that. And then APA discusses how to actually cite sources at the end of a report. So how do you actually put together references? Who knows what APA stands for? Yes? Yeah, really, really close. It's American Psychological Association, right? So yeah, pretty spot on there. So APA stands for the American Psychological Association. And there's a lot of different disciplines that you're going to take classes in here at USC that use this style. So if you look at, like, here's just a handful of them, right? So especially if you're going into business or anthropology, politics, psychology, social work, like all of these, it's the most commonly used citation style of all of them. So if you're going to master one of them, this is the one that you're going to see most. MLA is very common in there, other citation styles as well. But I mean, this is a lot of required courses or courses that fulfill basic requirements for us. So a lot of different areas use APA. And then, so what I want to start by talking about is like, where can you find the rules for APA style? You have to understand what the rules are, and a lot of the stuff can generally be found online somewhere or in a book. So this is what the book actually looks like. This is the most recent APA style manual, and it's available in the library. You can go to the resource desk and you can check it out. And they have one in the Writing Center, right?
Two copies.
2 copies in the Writing Center, so you can go find your answers in there if you have questions. Other places you can turn to, a great resource, because APA style is not something that's included in like all of your textbooks. It's important to know, if your instructor didn't make you spend the money to buy an extra resource like this, to know where to go to find it, right? And so here's one place you can go, is apastyle.org. So this is a great resource, apastyle.org. Where is this going? Technology is too cool. So this takes you to the APA style homepage, apastyle.org. So obviously, if you want to answer APA, go to the home page, and then they can help you with that. And so it gives you, there's some really most popular things here. How do you, the basics of APA style? How do you reference a web page that lists no author, which is a good majority of web pages. Go to the APA website, and you can't find the answer there, you can go to the goo.gl website, and it gives you all kinds of interesting information here about an overview and workshop, and how to cite basic sources. So if you're wondering, how do I cite a certain source, they'll give you the answer. So that's a really good resource to take a look at. And you can also, I took this from the OWL website. This is essentially the basic rules you need to know on one piece of paper. So how to actually format your report, how to put in-text citations in a report, and then the basics that you need to know for a very simple references page. So you can just download like this one page and probably have a good chunk of what you need to know on this one piece of paper. And I just took that from their website. Another place you can go is the APA style blog. So this is people actually just sit around and blog and answer questions that people have about APA style all day long. That sounds very exciting, right? It is. So you can ask a question like, how do I cite, let's say you read something on Twitter, it's called controversies, you want to cite this in something you're writing. You can actually cite Twitter. Right? So you find something on Twitter and it sends you to a different source, you can cite that. So you can cite almost anything. And this is a place where it will help you figure out your answers, how to cite it. Then the last place I would tell you to go is just go to our Writing Center. Right? Like the Writing Center, these are people who watch this presentation a lot, who deal with APA formatting a lot, and are more comfortable maybe than others talking about APA format, or at least can help you with finding your answers. And just right here in this little red box, you can schedule them right there, and then go in for 30 minutes and have them, maybe you can just go in and say, hey, could you help me check just my source citations or my source usage to help me see that I'm doing them properly, and then can walk through those bits a little bit. So it's another good reference when trying to understand how to use sources in APA style. So that's the first part, right? So quick little overview of where do you go to find the information yourself. The second part of the thing I want to talk about is just how do you, or when do you cite specific sources? And how do you do that in APA, and how does it differ from like MLA, for example? So we know that you want to cite a source anytime you quote something, right? So if you quote a source word for word, then you have to cite that source. And if you don't, right, then it's plagiarism. And we have like a 2 strikes penalty here at USD. So plagiarize twice and get caught and sent to the dean of students twice for this, they kick you out of USD, right? As most universities will do after several strikes. So just understanding how this works. So here are the basics, those of you taking notes to write down. Here's what you want to remember today. One of the things that's very important in this presentation. Here are the things you must write down every time you use a source in APA citation. First, you need to have an author. You must know your author. And you must know the year of publication. So you need an author and a year every time you quote something in APA. Then, if you're quoting, you also need a page number if you can find one, right? If the source has page numbers, you need a page number. So you need an author, a year, and a page number. Now, that's not the same as MLA, right? So MLA is different. You need an author and a page number, but not always a year. So this is important to know. So let's say you were looking at those words in white here, and you wanted to cite this exact quote from this textbook, Essentials of Business Communication. The more you understand the changing job market, the better equipped you will be to enter it wisely. You wanted to use that exact quote because it sounds well stated by Ms. Guffey in this case, and I know the name of the textbook, I've got a year, and I've got a page number. You might do something like this. You would introduce the quote with an author's name and an APA, just an author's last name. You can use an author's first initial before the name, but you don't necessarily have to. So you'd say, according to Guffey, year. And this is the thing to remember, please. Very important. Never separate an author's name from a year in APA. Like, don't just pick the year up and stick it at the end of the quote because you want something at the end. You can't do that. The author and the year need to go together. So you'd say something like, according to Guffey, 2015, comma, and then there's the quote. And then here's how you use the page number. You use a P, followed by a period, space, and then the page number 426. Right, so this is a basic way to cite a source using APA formatting. And then notice that period after the parentheses. That period after that parentheses, the 426, shows that those parentheses belong to that quote. If you were to put the period before that, then those parentheses would belong to the next sentence, and that's not what we want to do. So we want to make sure you put that period in the same place, in the proper place as well. Now, if you choose instead, you choose not to include an author's name in this because, let's say, you just got finished citing Guffey and you don't want to say Guffey over and over again. Guffey says, Guffey says, Guffey says. And so you just got finished quoting her, and then you want to cite her again in the next, maybe later in that paragraph or in the beginning of the next paragraph, the shorter paragraphs. You can say like this: she continues by stating that. As long as you haven't referred to a different she, then we know that you're still referring to Guffey. And you say, she continues by stating that, and then here's the quote. The more you understand the changing job market, the better equipped you'll be to enter it wisely. And so here's the other way, right? So this is the second way to write down. There are two ways. This is the second. The second way asks you to put all of that information in the parentheses. So you'd say Guffey, comma, year, comma, page number. Right? So then we just kind of squeeze it all together in this case. So you have two options. You can introduce with the name and the year, or you can put that name and the year at the very end in the citation. Those are your two choices. Don't mix and match those three parts, though. The name and the year need to go together. When we write something that's much longer, like an 8 or 10-page report of some sort, and we want to use some longer quotes and something like that, then we need to cite our source slightly differently. So in APA, if a quote you want to use is 40 words or longer, then you separate that whole quote from the rest of the paragraph. Right? So here's one of those things that's a different rule in MLA than APA. Because in MLA, they say if it's 4 lines or longer. In APA, you have to count the number of words. So if you have 40 words or more, then what we do when we use that quote is we indent the entire quote, as we see in the example on the television screen, the computer monitor. You indent the whole thing. You say Guffey's, you put the year right after that. Guffey's text states the following, colon. You provide the entire 40-plus word quote, all of it indented to show the whole thing is a quote. And then the slight difference here we see is that period at the very bottom of it doesn't go after the 426 parentheses, it comes right before it. So it's just a slight difference for when you want to use a long quote. Now, I think that an important thing for me to say here is try not to use too many long quotes. It looks like lazy writing when you just quote long bits here and there throughout the course of something that you've written, instead of actually taking material in and parsing through and figuring out what's really needs to be quoted and what this doesn't. But if you've got something that's long and you want to quote the whole thing, this is what it would look like. Right? And this would appear right in the middle of the paragraph most likely, because you want to have a topic sentence for that piece. So that is one time you use an in-text citation, when you're quoting. The second time you have to cite a source is when you're paraphrasing. Right? And we're going to you'll probably talk about paraphrasing a lot in the writing classes that you take, do some practicing with it, because it's not as easy as just changing every third word. Right? Changing every third word is still technically plagiarism, because that sentence structure, if you just change every third word, the sentence structure still belongs to the original author. And if you retain that sentence structure, you've stolen that person's way of saying things, not like the words themselves, but how they decided to put them in a certain order. That belongs to somebody else. So paraphrasing is not just changing words here and there. There's 4 steps that you can follow to actually create a really well-stated paraphrase. And the first thing you can do is to take the information you provided. Let's say you've got 2 sentences worth of information that you want to use in a source. And the goal here is to paraphrase a lot and to quote very little. Right? You want to have 20% or less of anything you ever write to be quotations. Even if it is longer, paraphrasing is better. It shows the ability to think critically about material, think about it in your own mind, and then put it on a piece of paper in your own words. So what you want to do is take a sentence or 2 worth like bits of information and break it down into different parts, like the who, the what, the when, the where, the why. See if you can take different elements and simplify them in some way. And so let's say you are writing a paper for a history class. This history, some history classes use APA. And let's say you wanted to use these 2 sentences at the very top here. At Chancellorsville, Union General Joseph Hooker frittered away an excellent start and several good chances for victory. As a result, he lost 17,000 Union men. And so if we just break these sentences into different smaller parts, you can see we've got a where it happened, followed by a who did something, and then what, in this case, he did. And then that last sentence really is just a result. It's like, well, because he did these things, this other thing happened. So it's kind of like another what. So I can take those two sentences and I can break those pieces down into 4 nuggets of information. And if I've got 4 pieces of information, it's much easier then to deal with figuring out how can I paraphrase this. So the next step after I've broken those things apart then is step 2. Let's take the information that I was going to paraphrase and let's just move it around. Right? Let's make sure that we're not presenting information in the way that we write it in the exact same order it appeared in the original. Because again, then it's just stealing the sentence structure. And we can move things around really easily when you rearrange things. Like, it's not difficult to actually do that. So you can, very simply, as you see at the bottom here, if we number those parts the way that we get them in those 2 sentences at the top, we can simply just take that last sentence and make that first. Right? So let the last be first in this case, right? And so I can just reorder it this way. That's a very simple reordering. We could get more complex than that too. Well, that's just one way to restructure the sentence structure to help yourself own that. Then, like, that's easy to do those 2 things. The difficult part of paraphrasing is then like, all right, let's put it in our own words. How can I actually say something? Like, how do I restate this in my own words? And so if we look at like the original and then maybe this restatement here, you can see there are certain words that we can't find another way to say. There's only one way to say 17,000. There's only one way to say that. There are other ways, but if you said 3 fewer than 20,000 people, then why would you do that, right? Your reader would want to punch you, right? So we don't want to make it more complex. You can't say Union a different way, right? They're from the Union. You can't change the title of the city, Chancellorsville. You can't change the title of the general. He was a Union general. You can't change his name. Everything else, I should be able to find a new way to say. Every other word, I should be able to restate, other than words like the, and for. So I can restate it and make it look something like this if I take the last part first. I could say 17,000 Union, and in this case, those men were soldiers, right? So I could say 17,000 Union soldiers died or were severely injured. We're talking about the Civil War here. A lot of people got maimed, and there were a lot of limbs that now it's getting too graphic. Right? It was the Civil War. It was bad. That's maybe understated. So we can say that, and then instead of saying just at Chancellorsville, I can say at the Battle of Chancellorsville. And then I can use this other phrase where Joseph Hooker, comma, a Union general. All right, so what I did is I took Union General Joseph Hooker, and I just flipped it, right? I just took the 2 words there, and I put them in front of the other 2 words, and I created a different construction. You know what that's called? You know what the grammatical term for what I just did is? It's a tricky one, actually. It's called an appositive, right? It's just a renaming, right? Union General renames Joseph Hooker. So it's an appositive phrase. So I flipped them, and then what did he do? To frit away an excellent start and several good chances for victory is like saying he simply allowed defeat to set in when he didn't take advantage of like the early advantages that he had, right? So this is a simple way to restate this. Now, almost all of these words then are my own words, except for the proper nouns that I can't change. And even when there are proper nouns, I can still move them around to allow myself to own the sentence structure, not just be borrowing from this individual his sentence structure. So this is the tricky part, right? But if I deal with each of those parts individually, then I've broken those two sentences down into 4 parts, it makes it a little bit easier. Then the easiest part of all of this is part 4. I have to add a lead-in to my paraphrase. And this is where I say, according to Bruce Campton, and I provide a year. Or I just say, according to Campton, or B. Campton, and I provide a year. What else did I add to that? Good. I put a page number at the end, because in the orange I've got to have a source, and I added something else to this that wasn't the original. Good. I called him an American Civil War historian. Why did I add that? Thank you. Yes, because I wanted Bruce Campton to have some credibility. Why do I want Bruce Campton to have credibility? Yeah, because I'm using his work, and I want credibility for myself, right? So if I know this person is a historian and he's written several books on this, why not call him what he is to then lend myself some credibility? So I'm not just saying I took this off some random place, I don't know who this guy is. All right, so this is a good way to add a nice little tag to him to let readers know, like, this is a guy who knows what he's talking about, and we should probably trust the facts that he's presenting to us. Here's another way to do that, right? Just you could introduce it by saying, one noted social scientist claims, right? And then we provide a quote, or a paraphrase in this case, from someone, and then we cite that source. And then if our readers wanted to know who this social scientist was and find out more about her, we could send her to find Jacobson from our references page. Right? So here's another way to do that if you don't want to provide that reader. So we looked at 2 examples of how to present that information. Here would be the second from earlier. So that's how we cite sources. I'm going to skip these 2 slides just for that. So that is basically essentially how you paraphrase and when you cite sources when we're quoting. So that's when to do it. Here's how you do it. So there's a ton of different types of sources. It's not just like scholarly sources, and it's not just books. There's a lot of different types of sources we want to actually be able to try to cite. So I want to go through some of the more basic ways that you cite authors and sources here, just so you have, those of you who are taking notes and are going to use this later, just so you have this basic information down, and you can pull back to your notes to know how do I actually present this when I'm using this information. So I'm going to look at, not all of them, because there are a lot of different types of sources, but the more common ways to cite sources. So let's say you're citing just a source with one author. I'm going to present to you several different types of sources and 2 ways to cite each one. The first way, you're going to see the top of all of these, is using that signal phrase, where you say according to someone, and then maybe you provide that person some credibility. And then the second way I'm going to present to you is that, let's say maybe you don't introduce the source by the person's name, but you introduce it a different way, like according to the book blank, or according to the article and the article's title, and then you're going to use the author's name but down below. So you'd say something like this: according to Jacobson 2008, that's how you would introduce a work by one author. Or in an end citation here, you'd say Jacobson 2008. Now, I don't have a page number in here, and here's why. In APA, you need a page number when you quote something, but you don't need a page number if you paraphrase it. Okay, so you need a page number when you quote. You don't have to have a page number when you paraphrase. So if you're finding a source online that, say, doesn't have page numbers, it's generally a good idea, instead of quoting it, if you can, to try to paraphrase it. So then you don't have to deal with presenting that, counting paragraphs, or figuring out how you're going to actually present that information. So paraphrasing, again, here's another way to kind of like troubleshoot the requirements that APA places on you as to how to cite that source. Often we have sources that are published by 2 people, right? And so if you are citing a source that's got 2 authors, it looks just something like this: Brewster and Railsback 2013 claims. So it looks just like with one, except we say and. And then APA does this thing to us just to mess with us a little bit and says, look, if you want to cite this in the end citation, don't say and, use an ampersand. Right? So Brewster ampersand Railsback, comma 2013. So just make sure that you know if you're going to use 2 or more, if there's 2 or more authors in the source you're using, you want to cite it that way. So it would look something like this if you were citing a source with 2 authors, right? This is what it would actually look like. I didn't, and you need a page number in there because there's a quote in that source. So that's what it would look like. If you are taking a class in the sciences, you're going to use a lot of research that is written by many different people. Because in labs and other places, there's many different people working on this, and these people all want their name on what's going to get published. Because it's good for their career. It's good for, sometimes they get paid for their work, right? And so they want their name on the work. So in classes you're taking in the sciences and some social sciences as well, not just the hard sciences, you're going to cite sources. You're going to find a lot of sources that have 3 or more authors. And if there are 3 or more authors, you would simply say exactly how those authors are presented to you in the citation, right? Sparks and Smith, year, and then some sort of verb, right? They demonstrate this or they claim that. If you were going to instead just use the end citation version, again, we use the ampersand, right? Sparks, ampersand, Smith, year, the first time we cite it. Then every other time you cite this source, you don't write every single name out. You just write, et al. 2008. All right, so what does et al. Mean then? It's Latin. Anybody know the rough translation? I want to take a guess at the rough translation first, et al. Something's been left out. Let me take a guess. What do you think et al. Means? You guys don't do crossword puzzles, obviously, then. This is a huge crossword puzzle clue, always. Just look at the words, ET, or letters, ET, A, and L. All right, so it stands for and others. That's it. It's Latin for and others. So write and others. All right, so you're not going to write the whole thing out. It's going to hurt your word count in the long run, but you don't include those things, right? So any subsequent use, you can just say et al. If you've got 6 or more authors, you only ever list the first author. So if you're working in a scientific lab at some point or somewhere else, and you're actually publishing something with other people, try to get your name first, because your name will get those hits then, right? Otherwise, you become part of an et al. Or an and. Unless you're in charge of that lab, that's probably not going to happen, right? But do your best. So it looks something like this if there's 6 or more. Just remember, you only want to use that first author. The first author's name. And so how do you know which author to use, by the way, I should say? You don't just pick one that sounds like an easy name to write. You choose whichever name actually is first and how it was published. All right, so that's some simple information with names. Government documents don't have authors, authors generally. If you work for the United States government and you do something for them, they claim ownership of it, right? And they produce a lot of material and data and information. And when the United States government or an organization that is associated with the United States government, especially the federal government, puts information out, we have to know how to cite that information. Let's say we're citing the Centers for Disease Control, or we're citing the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in this case. We need to know how to cite that. So if I were going to cite something from them, I would say, according to the United States Department of Health and Human Services. And then I put the little acronym in there with the year. And then every other time I reference this as a source, I use just that acronym, the USDHHS. And so it kind of saves us from having to type those words over and over again. If at the bottom, then, you're just citing a source within parentheses, you do the same thing. You cite the first time U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and then in those brackets inside the parentheses, you put the acronym with the year. And then every time after that, you simply say, you just use that acronym. And so you're going to get a lot of information that's produced by companies and governments that we need to cite that don't actually have people, authors that we get to use here because it's owned by that organization. So let's say you're citing a document that came out of Ford Motor Company, you need to cite it Ford Motor Company, not Henry Ford. Lots of times you don't know who the author is, right? There isn't one because let's say it's a quick little newspaper write-up and some newspaper article, quick little pieces in some newspapers, just bits of information, whether online or paper newspapers, they don't actually have authors. The byline just essentially says staff writer sometimes. We don't have an author, we don't know who the author is, and we don't include the author. And so if this were the title, let's say, of a newspaper article, the 2011 oil shock, and we didn't know who wrote it, then we actually cite the source in the text itself by using the title of that newspaper article, there's no author, right? So if you don't have an author, that's another way to do it. You must provide a date in APA. The problem is sometimes there are no dates, or you're going to a website and you're pulling something off. I talked to somebody about this actually last week. Somebody was pulling something, that's why I said this before, from the Centers for Disease Control. And it was on their website. And he wanted to cite something from their website. The websites don't include dates on just random things always that they post on the different pages on that site. So you can't just put a date 2018 because that's when you found it, because you don't know when it went up. So we actually have to put ND, which stands for no date. So you'd say author ND states. And then it does, then you're at least showing, hey, I couldn't find a date, I looked for it, there wasn't one, and the reader doesn't say, oh, you forgot the date. You say, I didn't forget the date, there is no date. Right? So these are the two different ways you can actually provide no date. All right, and then this is maybe one of the other most important slides on here. So when we do scholarly research, using research databases through IWE's library and elsewhere, we want to find research that's using other research. It shows that that research is credible. So let's say I'm on EBSCO, and I find a source for something I want to use, and I'm reading that source, and in that source I'm reading, there's all these wonderful quotes from other authors that this person is citing. And I want to use one of those quotes in what I write. It's called an indirect source, and here's how you do it. So we would name the original source, the original quote that I'm taking in a signal phrase. So let's imagine you see these two gentlemen's face up here, Steven Spielberg and Quentin Tarantino. So let's imagine Steven Spielberg wrote a book on film, as he could do. And in that book, he interviewed a bunch of filmmakers, and he had a chapter on violence and gore and cursing, and he was quoting Tarantino in there. And you're like, that's a cool quote. Quentin Tarantino is a weird guy, and I want to use his quote in the thing that I'm writing, in my review here. What I need to do is say, Tarantino says blank, and then give that quote. But I have to be able to show to the reader of my document where I got the quote. And this is why I need to use this phrase, as cited in Spielberg. So if I'm looking at that sentence, what I know is, okay, Spielberg used this quote from Tarantino. And I know that I'm giving credit to both Spielberg, who wrote this document, and then Tarantino, who made the original claim. So this is how you cite one person who's citing another person. And you should probably do this. Or you should be using sources that cite other sources, I should say. So and that's the phrase you want to know, as cited in. And then obviously, we want to cite Spielberg on our references page because people need to find the Spielberg text to find the Tarantino quote. And the purpose of that references page is to give people access to our sources so they can find the information that we actually used. So this is a very important one. So just make sure you understand it's called an indirect source and how to do that, cite a source that's citing another source. If you do you have some sort of personal communication via email, or there's an interview and somebody shows up for their interview and then you ask them questions, or you are writing something and you want to interview one of your professors here on campus, and you sit there, you go to their office hours and you talk to them, or you send them an email and ask them some questions and they know it's coming and they respond to that those questions, then you need to cite them as a source. And the way that you would do that is you cite the communicator's name, you cite the type of communication, which is generally just personal communication, and then you cite the date of that communication. So let's say you were chatting with Bill Gates one day, and he told you, yes, my computer was world-changing, and so you wanted to use that. You'd say, Bill Gates also claims his computer was world-changing, and you could just put in there that was from a personal communication happened. You can also say email communication in there if you'd like to. And then you cite the day and the year of that. All right. Now, this doesn't go on a references page. Why doesn't this go on a references page? What's that? Right, because you're the reference. Like, nobody can go find this source. It was you. You're the source. You did the interview. Like, well, they're the source, and you found them. So you never put something like a personal communication on a references page because nobody can track it down. Now, this is important for you to think about as a student, because if the assignment says that you're given, you must use 5 sources, and you find 3 scholarly sources and do 2 interviews, and then you turn something in, and the references page has 3 sources on it, and the professor says, well, where's the rest of your sources? And you can say, no, that's APA, I'm not supposed to put those on the references page. right? And then you know that rule and you can say, well, it wasn't supposed to be there, and that's why I didn't do it. All right, a couple of last things with citing sources that are kind of random now because of so much information that we're getting and using from online. Sometimes you'll find a source online that's just a PDF, right? You'll go to a website, let's say you want to know about the safety issues with a new Ford truck, and there's a PDF posted on some website somewhere, and you download that PDF. If it's posted as a PDF, when we've got these electronic documents that we're getting online, you obviously want to include a page number if there's PDFs. However, a lot of the stuff we find online doesn't have page numbers. We still have to be able to direct the reader as to how to find that information. So if a page number is not available in your source, but the source, let's say, has paragraph numbers, you can give a paragraph number, right? You give a name, a year, and a paragraph number, and we say PARA for para, period, and then a number. If there are no paragraph numbers listed, usually there are not, from a source that you find on a website that's a good, credible website to use, then here's how you cite that so the person can find it. Right? So here we get an example of the CDC again. So the CDC 2010 warns that babies born to women who smoke during pregnancy are 30% more likely to be born prematurely. And here's how I cite that. That came off of a website. I cite the section that the information was under on that website. So most web pages have a title at the top of some sort, right, to tell you what you're about to look at, especially on something like the CDC, right? They're going to have each page, if you want to know, like we get sick and we Google symptoms and try to figure out what we are, like what do we have? Do I need to go to the doctor and pay the money to actually see a doctor or not? Sometimes we're directed to a page like this. At the top of that page, it might say something like the reality. And then I read 3 paragraphs down, I find this quote, and then I want to cite paragraph 3 from the section called the reality. Then on my references page, I'm going to give a link to that website so people can go find it and then pull up this actual page. Right? So here's how you present information that actually just comes from the internet somewhere. So that's the second part. The third part of this presentation then is, I think, maybe the fastest part, and it's the references page or the references list. So a couple things to consider. Anytime you write something that you use sources for, you have to cite those sources in your report. And you're required to have a references page or a references list if you cite any sources in your report. Every source on your references page must be in your report. You can't just put like 2 or 3 extra ones on there that you never cite. And then every entry in the list, right, has to be there, right? So vice versa. If it's in your page, if it's in your report, it goes on the list. If it's on your, you must use it in your report, the exception being interviews. And then the other thing to think about here is all of the entries on our references page, just like in MLA, are listed in alphabetical order by an author's last name, or if we don't have an author, by the first thing that we do have, which is generally with no author, the title. So the little cheat sheet I told you could get from our website, this is the far right-hand column. It gives you the basic ways to cite these different types of sources. So here are the basic considerations when putting together a sheet like this, and some of these are similar to MLA. If you're familiar with MLA, we use hanging indentation. Hanging indentation is when every line after the first one is indented, essentially a tab space. Authors' names are inverted, meaning we use an author's last name followed by her first name. And we use an author's full last name, but then in APA we use only an author's initials. So whatever initials are provided to us in the page that we find on EBSCO, let's say, that gives all the documentation information we need, those are the initials we use. So they're not full first names, we don't use those. We alphabetize, as I said, by the author's last names. You should maintain punctuation and capitalization used by journals. So if the title of a journal decides it doesn't want to be capitalized, don't just capitalize it. Some of them are artistic, let's say, and they want things presented a certain way, so they decide if it's a journal for E.E. Cummings, maybe, who didn't capitalize his name, they wouldn't want to capitalize the name of their journal. So you maintain punctuation as they use it. You should, however, if it's not something that is all in lowercase, then you should capitalize the major words in their titles as they present them. In APA, when you refer to books, chapters, articles, or web pages, you should capitalize, and this is weird, you should capitalize only the first word of the title. This goes against a thing we've been told like since we were young. like capitalize all the important words in the title of something. This is the reverse of that rule. APA doesn't want you to capitalize any words except for the first one in the title of a book, a chapter in a book, an article from a journal. You should capitalize only the first word. And then the first word of a subtitle, too. Do not italicize anything or put quotation marks around or underline anything that's short, not in APA. So let's look at some quick examples of what this would look like. So here's what a book would look like on a references page. You'd have an author's last name followed by her first and middle initial, if there's a middle, the year of publication in parentheses. So if you're jotting these down and you jot down just the key for this first one, it's almost the same for all the rest of them. It's just a couple things that are different. The title of the work then, notice just the T is capitalized in that. And then we have a colon, and then the C is capitalized, and that would be our subtitle. Right? So title of work, colon, capital letter for subtitle. So you would capitalize the first letter, the first word, and then if there is a subtitle, you capitalize the title of that. And then you have the location, the publisher, and that's it for a book. For location in APA, you always include the city and the state, and we use the two-letter postal abbreviation, no period. So New York would look like we see here. Vermilion, SD with no periods. So that bottom example there, that's what one would look like. We have two authors with an ampersand, we get a year. This is italicized, but it's only capitalized here because it's book, right? But it's only capitalized the first word. We get where it's published, and we get who the publisher is. If you got to work by more than one author, as we just saw there, you're going to use that ampersand. If you've got scholarly articles, which you should have, it looks very much the same. You've got an author, you've got a year, you've got a title of something. But with a scholarly article, we've got a title of the article and then the title of the journal. And the journal, again, is italicized. So all of that is the same until we get to the Journal of Applied Research, where it's in italics. And then the 39 is the volume, and that should be italicized. And then the 1 is the issue. So if there's a volume and an issue, you need to present those separately. The 1 is not italicized. Then you need a page number and you need a DOI. I realize like writing all of this down is not something you want to do or to have to do. Go find the answers, right? But this is essentially what it would look like. Now a DOI is called a Digital Object Identifier. And sources and research databases generally have one. And you'll find it on that first page that tells you about that source. If there is one, you'll find it there. If there is no DOI, so in APA you've got to find the DOI. If there isn't one, then you say what research database you found it from. So retrieved from Search Premier, retrieved from EBSCOhost, retrieved from whatever other research database that it is that you're using. So that's one way to present it. If it doesn't have a DOI because maybe you found it online, you used Google Scholar to find it, then you present it this way by presenting the actual link to it. Now, APA doesn't want you to use a hyperlink, and so there should be nothing underlined in that entire presentation of that. I'm still having a problem with Prezi allowing me to remove it. It just won't let me take that out. But that's why I put the little note. Do not underline anything in this. But, so you do it a DOI, the research database, or the actual link to where you found it. You've got to have one of those three things at the end of your scholarly source. If you're using a web source, you've got the author. Here we get the same author we saw before, the title of something, America's Health Literacy, and subtitle, why we need accessible health information. You put when you got it from the resource, and then you put where it came from. So you put your link there. An online newspaper article looks very similar, you can see here. Sorry. And this is what it looks like in its final form. Right? So we see the hanging indentation. This means every line after the first one's indented. The reason for that is so you can find an author's name really quickly. We see at the very top, it should just be the word references. It's not underlined, it's not italicized, it's not in bold at the top of this page. It's just the word references. It's centered, it's plain. Everything's alphabetized. You can see the capitalization rules in here. This is a double-spaced example, which most examples will be. That you should follow what's presented to you by your professor. But essentially, this is what your references page will look like. So that's the last piece. Does anybody have any really interesting questions about this really interesting subject matter? I'm here if you do. I'm happy to address them. You can send me an email. Otherwise, I'm happy to address them in an email. I think that it's interesting or important to go try to find the answer first before you seek out somebody giving you the answer. And that's why you want to use those resources at the beginning of this presentation. So I think at this point, somebody's going to pass around some comment cards. Make sure if you're here, one of my students, that you put my name on there so they send me an email. And I've got a list of everybody who's here. Otherwise, please, everybody else, put your name and comments on here so that they can let your professors know if that's important. Well, thank you. Have a good Wednesday. For APA formatting.
So, folks, remember, anytime you need help with APA style, come to the Writing Center and check out the resources that Ken mentioned, the other resources. As you're filling out your comment card, remember, if you want PAW points, put your student ID on the front of the cards. And once you've filled out your comment cards, you can give them to Brooke, who distributed them, or to me.